Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Hami and these are the headlines. The number of daily coronavirus cases in the US has dipped under 60,000 after 10 days with 543 fatalities. The death toll in America has climbed to almost 147,000 with over 4.2 million infected. Brazil has reported 555 more fatalities and over 24,000 new cases, taking the death toll to over 87,000. Worldwide, the virus has claimed more than 648,000 lives, while the number of cases is over 16.2 million. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says that there is a visible reduction in the number of new coronavirus cases and deaths in the country. Addressing the media, Khan defended his government's policy of imposing smart lockdowns to keep the economy running. But he warned that the cases may rise again if people don't follow precautionary measures, especially on Eid holidays. Pakistan has reported 5,842 deaths among over 274,000 infections so far. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now with the news in detail. We start our news bulletin from the US, where the number of daily new coronavirus cases has dipped under 60,000 after 10 days with 543 fatalities. Death toll in America has climbed to almost 147,000 with over 4.2 million infected. Brazil has reported 555 more fatalities and over 24,000 new cases, taking the death tally to over 87,000. Over 647,000 people have been killed by the virus worldwide, while nearly 16.2 million have been infected. Details in this report.
The second wave of the new coronavirus, after surging in the Americas, Africa and parts of Asia, is now gripping Europe. Healthcare facilities in the US are beyond overwhelmed, with tens of thousands new cases sprouting every day. Mexico and Brazil are no different, with a combined tally of over 30,000 new COVID patients emerging every 24 hours. While Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro continues to defy the need for any restrictive measures, even tourists believe this approach is a recipe for disaster.
An assessment of the situation should have been done on whether the virus could be controlled or with the vaccine. If you don't have it and people can get infected, then it is a matter of safety.
The recent surge in Spain has sent alarm bells ringing through Europe as other regional countries follow UK's step of reimposing travel restrictions on the country. But Spain has called this an overreaction, saying it will negotiate with UK to exclude the Balearic Islands and the Canary Islands from the restrictions. Morocco too has reported its highest case count after months as the second wave hits the country. Australia's second most populous state of Victoria logged more deaths and a record daily increase of new cases. Premier Daniel Andrews says if people don't get themselves tested in time, the situation can get worse.
It's just a matter of fact we have too many people who have symptoms and they are going to work. And what that means, even with mask wearing, even with hand hygiene, even with distancing, that is an unacceptable risk in terms of transmitting this virus.
China recorded 61 new cases, the highest daily figure since April, due to clusters in 3 separate regions that have sparked fears of a fresh wave. Meanwhile, South Korea's new coronavirus cases have fallen back to below 30 as imported cases dwindled from a record high over the weekend.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says there is a visible reduction in the number of new coronavirus cases and deaths in the country. Addressing the media, Khan defended his government's policy of imposing smart lockdowns to keep the economy running. But he warned that the cases may rise again if people don't follow precautionary measures, especially on Eid holidays. The Prime Minister urged people to continue wearing face masks to ward off the disease. Pakistan has reported 5,842 deaths among over 274,000 infections so far. India has denied Kashmiri Muslims their religious right to offer the upcoming Eid al-Adha prayers in the name of COVID-19 precautionary measure. A statement from the Divisional Commissioner Office in Srinagar said all mosques shall remain closed for prayer on Eid. It said no public transport except passenger vehicles will be allowed to ply on the roads. The Indian-occupied Kashmir has been under New Delhi's lockdown and communications blackout for the past 356 days. The Taliban say they will not start the intra-Afghan talks unless all of the 5,000 prisoners in the list given to Kabul are freed. In an interview, the group's political chief, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, said results of implementation of the Doha Agreement with the US have been positive so far. But he said the group will take necessary decisions if Washington fails to pull out of Afghanistan according to the agreed timetable. Under the US Taliban peace deal, the Afghan government has so far released 4,245 prisoners. In exchange, the Taliban have released over 860 government hostages out of the 1,000 mentioned in the agreement. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's military says it has killed 6 Taliban fighters while thwarting attacks on security checkpoints in central Logar province. It said 8 fighters were wounded in the encounters in the capital, Pule Alam and Muhammad Agha district. The Taliban have not commented on the claims yet. In the occupied West Bank, Israeli settlers have desecrated a mosque in a suspected arson and vandalism attack. Residents said the attackers sprayed anti-Arab slogans and racist graffiti on the walls of a mosque in Al-Bir city. The Palestinian Emergency Services said a part of Al-Bir and Al-Sasan mosque has been burnt. He said the fire erupted after flammable liquid was poured through a smashed window before dawn. He said residents living near the mosque and firefighters extinguished the flames. During a cabinet meeting, Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shatai has held Israeli government responsible for the attack.
We condemn the crime of occupiers, the burning of Al-Bir and Al-Ihsan Mosque in the city of Al-Bira, and the writing of racist slogans on the walls of the mosque during the dawn of this day. This is the racist and a criminal act, and we hold the occupation state responsible and the responsibility of unbridled settlers and their increased violence.
In Iraq, at least 2 protesters have been killed and dozens wounded in Baghdad during renewed demonstrations against corruption and unemployment. It is the first such deadly incident for months at Tahrir Square, which became a symbol of anti-government demonstrations last year. Nearly 500 people were killed during the last year's protests. The renewed wave of protests is a test for Iraq's new Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi, who's sworn into office in May. Al-Kadhimi has promised a dialogue with the protesters and has requested comprehensive lists of all those who have been killed in the protests. Beijing says the U.S. consulate in China's southwestern city of Chengdu has been formally closed. Beijing ordered the facility to be shut in retaliation for China being ousted from its consulate in Houston, Texas by Washington. In a statement, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the U.S. flag on the consulate has been lowered and its plaque removed. It's the Chinese authorities have taken possession of the premises. Beijing says that closing the consulate is a legitimate and necessary response to unreasonable measure by the United States. The Foreign Ministry also alleged some American staff at the consulate interfered in China's internal affairs and endangered its security and interests. Hong Kong has announced a ban on gatherings of more than 2 people, restaurant dining and mandated face masks in all the public places. Chief Secretary Matthew Chong said the steps have been taken to curb a surge in the coronavirus cases. The measures which take effect from Wednesday are the first time the city has completely banned dining in restaurants. Since late January, more than 2,600 people have been infected in Hong Kong, 20 of whom have died. During the last 24 hours, China has reported 61 new cases, sending alarm bells for greater prevention and control measures. Germany has rejected a proposal by the US President Donald Trump to invite Russian President Vladimir Putin back into the G7. In an interview, Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said Moscow needs to actively solve the conflict in Crimea and eastern Ukraine first. Maas described the relationship with Russia as currently difficult in many areas. He said Moscow's unrelenting disrespect of international rules and norms is why it remains outside of the G7 and will continue to remain out. But he said Germany needs Russia to solve conflicts such as those in Syria and Libya. Trump raised the prospect of invitation last month following Russia's expulsion from the bloc in 2014 when it annexed Crimea. The ceasefire in Donbass, the region on the borderline of eastern Ukraine, has come into effect today. On 22nd of July, Ukrainian and the pro-Russian separatists agreed to a complete and all-encompassing ceasefire in the conflicting Donbass region. The truce is backed by Russia's President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky. Germany and France mediated talks between Ukraine and Russia since a peace agreement was signed in Minsk in 2015 and have applauded this move. But some differences remain as Kremlin opposes Kiev's planned format of elections in Donbass region, saying it is a violation of the Minsk agreement. Meanwhile, Zelensky called for the release of the Ukrainian citizens being held in eastern Ukraine, Crimea and Russia. In Russia's eastern city of Khabarovsk, for the third weekend in a row, hundreds gathered to demonstrate against the arrest of provincial ex-governor Sergei Furgal. The weekend's protests were reportedly the largest to have taken place over the past weeks. These include chants of freedom for Furgal, "This is our region," and "Away with Putin." Sergei Furgal is now in jail in Moscow on charges of attempted murder and ordering 2 contract killings some 15 years ago. Supporters say the charges are politically motivated. Furgal, who denies the allegations, beat a pro-Kremlin candidate in an election nearly 2 years ago. In the US, Black Lives protests continue to rage across numerous cities for the 60th day, with dozens of arrests being made. Police arrested 45 people in Seattle and 21 officers got injured in clashes with the protesters. Elsewhere, the body of civil rights and US Representative John Lewis made its final journey over the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. The bridge becomes a landmark in the fight for racial justice when Lewis and other civil rights marchers were beaten there 55 years ago on Bloody Sunday. Meanwhile, several marchers in Louisville, Kentucky, to protest the killing of Breonna Taylor. Protests against systemic racism and police violence have engulfed the country since the custodial murder of African-American George Floyd in May. Thousands of Israelis have joined nationwide demonstrations over the weekend against the government. Demonstrators demand Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's resignation over corruption charges and his government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Protesters chanted slogans such as "Bibi resign," 1 million unemployed, Prime Minister, as huge crowds rallied in Tel Aviv and in other cities. Police made several arrests and deployed water cannon to dispel the protesters. Israel is witnessing a surge in unemployment as figures rise to 20% over the ongoing pandemic. Demonstrators argue the financial assistance offered by the government hasn't been nearly enough. The number of coronavirus cases has also soared since the lockdown was lifted in May, which has also come under fire. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani and the US military chief had discussed strategic cooperation between the two nations. In a statement, Amir's office said Al Thani hosted US Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley in Doha. The statement said the two sides also discussed regional developments and joint efforts to enhance security and stability of the region. Qatar hosts some 13,000 US troops in Al Udeid Air Base, 30 kilometers southwest of Doha. The base is used as a central command for operations against terror groups in Iraq and Syria. On Friday, General Milley paid an unannounced visit to Israel and met with senior Israeli military and intelligence officials. In Sudan, 60 people have been killed and another 60 injured in fresh violence in the West Darfur region of Sudan. UN officials said around 500 armed men attacked a Mastedi town north of Beda village. UN said 20 others were killed earlier as they returned to their fields for the first time in years. Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok announced that Khartoum will be sending security forces to Darfur to protect its citizens. No group has claimed the responsibility for the attacks so far. The death toll from floods in India's northeastern Assam state has jumped to 102. The state's disaster management authority said 5 deaths were recorded in the past 24 hours. Over 2.6 million people have been affected by the deluge in Assam's 27 districts. Meanwhile, in Bangladesh, the death toll in floods has surged to 119 with 8 more fatalities. Environmental experts have warned of long-term adverse impact due to the flooding in the country. The monsoon season usually falls from June to September, causing widespread death and destruction across the region every year. Gone with the Wind star and the last surviving actress of the golden age of Hollywood, Olivia de Havilland, has died at the age of 104. Her publicist said the actress died of natural causes at her home in Paris, where she had lived for more than 60 years. The two-time Academy Award-winning actress also starred opposite swashbuckling Errol Flynn in a series of films starting in 1930s. She made a lasting impression as the bashful southern Belle Elaine in Gone with the Wind in 1939.
Well, I love making Gone with the Wind, and the mysterious thing is that we had a feeling in those days when a film lasted 1 year and then we never saw it again, that this film would last longer. We never thought it was going to last, 60 years.
A Swiss pharmaceutical company has completed the first transaction under a new humanitarian trade channel with Iran. The Swiss humanitarian trade arrangement channel to bring food and medicine to Iran started trial operations in January and is exempted from the US sanctions. In a statement, Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs said more companies are being added after approval for further transactions. SECO did not identify the Swiss drug maker or give a value for the shipment, but said it carries cancer drugs for Iranians battling the disease. The pilot deal in January shipped to Iran cancer drugs and drugs required for organ transplants worth $2.7 million. Geneva-based bank BCP and drug maker Novartis took part in the pilot deal. China's thousands of state-owned enterprises, local governments and public institutions are expanding hiring. This comes as a record number of students graduate in a job market left reeling with the COVID-19 pandemic. Boss Zipin Research says around 8.7 million Chinese students are graduating this year, almost 500,000 more than last year. Is that the private firm's job market for graduates has fallen 22%, which has created an active employment crisis in China. Beijing has warned graduates who generally enter the workforce in June or July may face a severe situation. President Xi Jinping has urged companies to hire more people, fearing that the struggling graduates can turn into negative energy. Most European stocks have edged lower as surging COVID-19 cases and worsening US-China relations worry investors. The pan-European stock 600 fell 0.5%, with travel and leisure stocks tumbling over 3%. London's FTSE slid marginally, while Paris's CAC 40 also slid. Frankfurt's DAX was the only one in positive territory as it edged up fractionally. Gold prices rocketed to a record high as spooked investors rushed into safe haven amid coronavirus worries. The metal has surged more than 1% to $1,930.48 per ounce in Asian trade. And in football, Juventus beat Sampdoria by 2-0 to claim their 9th successive Serie A title in Turin. Cristiano Ronaldo and Federico Bernardeschi scored a goal each for Juventus. Ronaldo dedicated the title to the club's fans, particularly those that have suffered as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Juventus has become the only team to win 9 consecutive titles in one of Europe's top 5 leagues. In football, Manchester United and Chelsea have qualified for the UEFA Champions League at the expense of Leicester City. United beat Leicester 2-0 in the most important fixture of the season, but Wolves' dream of playing Europa League was demolished after losing 2-0 to Chelsea. In another match, champions Liverpool ended their historic campaign with a 3-1 win against Newcastle. Aston Villa will play Premier League football next season after a draw at West Ham was enough to ensure they escaped relegation. Leicester City's Jamie Vardy ended the season as a top scorer with 23 goals. The West Indies are faced with an uphill task of scoring 389 to win the third test when play resumes today on the 4th day of the match. The Windies will need to really buckle down, especially after losing early wickets last night to Stuart Broad. At stumps on day 3, the visitors were 10 for 2 with Craig Brathwaite and Shea Hope unbeaten on the crease. Earlier, England declared their second innings after putting 226 runs on the scoreboard, giving the visitors a target of 399. Both the openers, Rory Burns and Tom Sibley, as well as skipper Joe Root, and now the weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.